And welcome back to the Texas Longhorn Football Channel. I am your host, Anwar Richardson, and as the co-host, my main man, Ari Temkin. Hey, man. Ari Temkin, he's on the Big 12 Network. He's on covers the Dallas Cowboys. He writes for Orange Bloods. He produces for Orange Bloods. He's in our videos. He also does the janitorial work. He does everything. I think he's got an OnlyFans page. About that. Ari's got everything covered. That's why I call him, hey, man. How are you doing?
I should launch an OnlyFans page, actually.
You want to make money, Ari. You've been doing everything. You did that. So to make sure that no one is subjected to Ari and an OnlyFans page, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, keep him motivated in this sector so no one is tortured other than his wife. And make sure you share some of these videos with your friends. So you share a lot of things on Facebook and social media. Go ahead and share this video because I think you guys are going to enjoy it, be entertaining. Hit the like button right now, though, because you know it's me and Ari, so you already like it so far. Ari, so here's the news of the week. And I'm glad that I get a chance to talk to you this week because it's so much in your wheelhouse, which is Bob Bowlsby, the Big 12 commissioner, announcing that he will be stepping down later this year. I have lots of thoughts. I have lots of questions. But before I get into that, I just want to get your general thoughts going into it about Bowlsby stepping down.
Yeah, it's surprising. Certainly surprising from a timing standpoint. Pretty wild to think that you've got a week here of headlines with a team in your conference winning a national championship in basketball, and yet despite that, you decided to get in your own way with headlines and sort of steal your own headlines. Now, granted, this was something that was apparently in the works for a couple of weeks, and so it was being held out for some time. But yeah, I mean, it is a bit off-putting that you've got a week to at least to get headlines and celebrate a big, a Kansas national championship and what that means to the Big 12 conference. And here we are just talking about Bob Bowlsby and his future. So not entirely surprising, Anwar, given Texas and Oklahoma bolting and his responsibility and culpability in that. But certainly the timing is a bit, I guess, questionable.
Wouldn't that be just so kind of Big 12-ish, though?
I mean, my God, yes.
Kind of like a reflection sometimes of the decision.
Cut off your nose despite your face.
Yeah, decision making. All right, I mean, honestly, Ari, the big thing for me in this conversation is, did this have to happen based off of losing Texas and OU? Like when you lose their two biggest programs, one of the biggest programs in the country, obviously, you had no idea it was coming, caught off guard, and with your pants down, and then we're left to be in scramble mode. When you lose the biggest things, is that one of those like, hey man, it's time for you to go regardless?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think there was anything that he could have done to keep Texas and Oklahoma because there was just no additions that they could make that would equal the opportunity that Texas and Oklahoma have in the SEC. So, the culpability thing for me isn't exactly there. Now, with that being said, there's certainly some rumors and suggestions that he should have seen it coming or could have been more prepared. And so in that vein, yeah, he bears responsibility. I think beyond that, you could certainly question the Big 12 now moving a ton of your basketball inventory from, over-the-air television to more of an OTT platform, which I think has actually been really good for the SEC because, as I mentioned before, on a Saturday, you used to put on ESPN or ESPNU or ESPN2 and see Big 12 basketball. And, that's not the case. Now the SEC is now dominating in terms of basketball coverage from ESPN. So the Big 12, their new deal with ESPN kind of took a lot of these games off of that Saturday slot on ESPN, ESPN2, and ESPNU and gave that window to SEC. So just a couple of things here that I think came for the reckoning of Bob Bowlsby. But ultimately, I think it's because he's older and there's just been an influx of new commissioners that are coming in right now.
One of the things I question a little bit as relates to, as I look at your Nike swoop sign straight in my face, as you must be adjusting something, I'll hold. Okay. It is, Ari, I don't know if you will agree, and I don't know if the viewing audience will agree, but let me just place this out there. I think one of the biggest missteps that the Big 12 had over the last several years was when they announced that they were going to expand initially and add in teams like a potential UCF was on there as a potential, USF, Cincinnati was a potential suitor. So these were teams that they were looking at in order to build this conference, in order to expand this conference and get it out. And ultimately, the Big 12 decided no, we're just not going to, we're going to stay put. We're going to keep our we don't want to, everyone's making money. We don't want to, we're just good with the way we are. Maybe could have even thought about it and had some vision to say, you know what, why don't we go raid some Pac-12 teams and see if there's any teams out there that we could potentially bring into the Big 12 again to expand. And it seemed like to me, the vision was too small, Ari. It was just, let's just get by day. And ultimately, I think Texas and OU realize this vision is too small. We're carrying this conference. And look, I'm not saying adding in a UCF would somehow that equates, but at least now you're adding in 12 teams. Like at least you expand a footprint down in Florida. Because ultimately, Ari, the thing that they turned their nose up to several years ago is the thing that they actually had to go do when Texas and OU left. And it makes me say, you could have done that previously. It may have given you a fighting chance. Maybe it doesn't, but I feel like the vision was too small. Am I a little bit off in my assessment, Ari?
Look, I think you're 100% correct insofar as the Big 12 was a little bit too comfortable and, and felt like, oh, we don't need to expand. We don't need to be looking at anything to make this conference more attractive. I don't know that there was a school that they could legitimately add that would have saved Texas and OU, but also maybe there was. You mentioned the Pac-12. Like, I don't think the Big 12 had added those 4 teams at that point in time, the teams that they eventually ended up adding, that Texas and Oklahoma, that'd be enough for them to stay. But if they go out and try to make a play for USC or Oregon, as unlikely as that might be, to your point, that's thinking bigger. It's thinking more long-term. It's securing the viability. So yeah, I do think there was a little bit of, sleeping on the job here as well.
Do you think that, from a positive standpoint, I think Bowlsby was able to get a little bit more TV money out of the negotiations. I think it was somewhere like 2013-ish or something to that effect. So I think there may be a certain positive that's associated with it. Does that resonate at all? Or do we just say, man, at the end of the day, you lost Texas and OU, and that just here lies, that'll be on your tombstone?
Look, I think Bob Bowlsby deserves a ton of credit. He saved the Big 12 at a point in time when it needed to be saved. Obviously with everything that was happening in the previous round of realignment, the Big 12 might have ceased to exist, but he came in, he brought the conference back together. He secured the viability of it. So I think there are so many positives to go over. Bob Bowlsby is a really good administrator and has been for a long time. So I think he could be both, a really good steward of this conference that saved it at a point in time, but simultaneously not be the best positioned for the future of this job. And look, there's reports out that he's being pushed out, that it's not as, it's not that Bob Bowlsby is stepping down. It's more of a performance issue and that he's being pushed out. And, I think that makes sense to me. I don't know why anybody would just give up a job like that, given the circumstances. I think that there is, some hurt feelings here from the Big 12 board of directors, and that he was pushed out, that they look at the future of this conference and say, where are we going and who's the right leader for us? So both of those things can be true. He could have made mistakes that led to the downfall of the conference, but ultimately was the person that saved the conference in the first place. after that first round of realignment.
So, or I mean, you deal with the Big 12. It'll be one of the last things I ask you. You deal with the Big 12 obviously all day. When you start thinking of not a name per se, but the kind of person that you think needs to be sitting in that seat going forward. You describe Bob as an older gentleman. We talked about the lack of vision that may have existed. So when you start thinking, okay, the person who needs to take over the Big 12 with these teams coming in the future, these teams that are leaving, what kind of characteristics does that person need to have, and what kind of vision do you think they need to have for this conference going forward?
It's a great question. I think the phrasing of it is right, because we could sit here and throw out names. Ultimately, though, it comes down to certain characteristics, and it also comes down to, do you go the route of the Pac-12 if you're the Big 12? They didn't go with a long time administrator at the college level. They went with new blood that was sort of an outsider. So is that the role? Is that the way that the Big 12 will go here? Do you go with a sort of an outsider, or do you go with a administrator, an athletic director, a conference commissioner, or an assistant commissioner, deputy commissioner, those kinds of things? I tend to lean towards somebody within the business, but also see the value of bringing some new blood in and potentially going outside of, academics and athletics and administration. So look, I think ultimately they need somebody that can negotiate, whether that be negotiating a television deal or just somebody that has negotiating skills. I think that's a huge deal. I think they need somebody that is well equipped to understand the future landscape of sports media rights, which might be an outsider, might not be a college administrator. And they need somebody that is going to galvanize the conference. Ultimately, the conference does exist and will continue to have a future, but I wouldn't be surprised to know that there are some schools that have some wandering eyes here, that if a better opportunity presented itself, that they wouldn't leave when that opportunity presents itself. At this point, the Pac-12, the ACC, and the Big Ten have no reason to expand or haven't made any indication they would. But if they do eventually and figure out that they need to, what does that mean for Kansas? What does that mean? Well, other schools that entertain the idea of maybe going there. So I think you need somebody that's going to galvanize this group. It's going to bring people together and say, let's be here for the future, which Bob Bowlsby didn't do a great job of, I don't think. So I think you can make the case that you're probably better off looking for somebody outside of athletics and academia, somebody that maybe is more adept at the future landscape of media rights. What do you think, Anwar? I mean, obviously you're from the Texas side of things. You've been saying throughout that the Bob Bowlsby and the Big 12 have made a mistake. What do you think all of this? Do you think that Bowlsby deserves responsibility, culpability for it? And who do you think would be a good next commissioner for the conference?
Well, I think it definitely deserves culpability. I mean, it happened on your watch. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like when they say you had one job. I mean, clearly he has a lot of jobs, but your main job is to make sure those guys are happy, right? That's your main job, is to make sure those guys are happy and they're getting everything that they need. And to your point, Ari, it's hard to turn down the SEC. But here's another thing too, Ari, that you can't ignore. When you're in a happy relationship, you usually don't have a wandering eye. When you're good and everything's good at home, you don't always want to look around because you just feel like I'm good. Like my wife is doing great. Like, everything is happy there. She's doing great with the kids, this and that. And then, but if you start getting hostility, arguments, so on and so forth, sometimes you start to have the wandering eye. Obviously, that works in reverse. With women who are like, my man's an asshole, but my work husband, he's really nice to me. You start having a wandering eye, right? And so, I think that's why I point to, I did a lack of vision, because the Texas and OU move is all about vision. It's all about where we're going to be, going forward. Where's this conference going to be going forward? It's about, aligning themselves and taking a back seat to these other programs, but also aligning themselves to what this thing looks like. They've set themselves up for the next 50 years, 70 years, 80 years, whatever that number looks like. And now the Big 12. So when you start to like what's left for the Big 12 right now, when we start thinking about the Big 12, what would be the flagship school? It's Oklahoma State. Is it Baylor? is a tag. I mean, I don't know what the flagship school, I don't know what the sexy school name is. Is it Kansas? But that's basically from a basketball standpoint. You know, it is almost like having Georgetown in your conference. It's like, it's like cool with the basketball program. So I don't know if Georgetown has a football program yet or not. So you got to
I don't think they do.
I don't know if they do or not. They may have one, and we just don't know about it. But I'm old enough and don't care enough to know. But no, for me, Ari, you've got to find someone that's taking what, you know, not trying to be disrespectful to any of the programs, because I think a lot of those guys do, you know, great jobs. But taking what's left and then finding a way to generate excitement about those programs. You know, how do you generate excitement where Oklahoma State plays UCF? How do you generate excitement when Texas Tech is going to play against the BYU? You know what I'm saying? How do you get people excited about Cincinnati versus Kansas on a Saturday? It's not to say Cincinnati's not a good program, but
right.
You get what I'm getting at. And you know, you've got to be able to figure out, okay, how we create rivalries, how we get people excited, how we market this thing, and so it becomes, you know, somewhat appealing. Yeah, gosh, you know, one thing I can't tell you this one thing that frustrated me about the Big 12 years ago. That whole co-champion thing with Baylor and TCU, that was such weak sauce to me. It was so weak. It looked so desperate at that time. It was just one of those, like, man, like, you know, and then it was one true champion, and okay. It was, anyway, you've got to have someone
right. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, you got to have someone that makes this conference look powerful and doesn't make it look weak. And if you get someone, I think, who can figure out that formula, I think that ends up being one of the persons for the job.
Yeah, look,
or the person.
I think you said it right about this is about vision. You know, this is about aggression. This is not about being passive. This is about being reactive. You know, and I think you're right. You know, the Big 12 felt like, oh, we're fine. We're okay. We're good. We'll just coast. I mean, Bob Bowlsby said as much at Big 12 media days. Mm-hmm. Oh, we're fine. I mean, he even said that to us. Like, we haven't looked at expansion. Everything's good. Everything's harmonious. And obviously he had no idea that it wasn't, and looks bad in not knowing that. There's a couple of names have been floated. Oliver Luck, Dennis Dodd has said from CBS that Oliver Luck is the favorite for this. Mm-hmm. Would that make you excited as somebody that, you know, for the future of the Big 12?
He's a guy that, you know, Texas fans are really familiar with because they've wanted him from an AD perspective, you know, several years ago. I think, you know, around, you know, the Patterson stuff, after Patterson, you know, there's always been an appeal for Luck and what he's been able to do throughout his career. You do need a visionary like that. I think he's the kind of guy that he has that reputation as a visionary, as a guy who could maybe take this program or conference. If you say Oliver Luck is a guy, I would say, okay, I would say this program, this conference is in good hands, because again, Texas and OU are leaving, man. I mean, what becomes the biggest conference game? What's the biggest conference game? You know, we got right now it's Red River, and that will be transferred over there. If it's Bedlam, well, that's not a conference game anymore. That's a non-conference game. What becomes the biggest conference game? That's what I'm saying. That's what that person is working against. That's what that person is working against. And that's the person who's got to get in and find a way to create excitement about that. And I think Oliver Luck is the guy that can do it.
What do you think is, if any, the implication here for Texas and Oklahoma?
As far as Bowlsby leaving?
Yeah.
None.
Right.
I mean, I think Bowlsby let it be known he was pissed off, you know, at Texas and OU at that point. And I think Texas and OU did a huge shoulder shrug. And when he was throwing a hissy fit about, they didn't tell me, well, Bob, that's kind of how it goes when you leave, right? You know, no one goes and walks into the boss's office and say, hey man, I think I'm looking about getting another job. Okay. I'll let you know how that works out. You don't do that. But you know what you do? You go in, you give them a 2-week notice. And you do, or if you're really, really not happy, you just quit because you got another job. Right. What Texas did was, like, they went, they talked to other people, interviewed, and said, okay, here's our, 3-year notice, 4-year notice, 5-year notice, but we're out. But they weren't going to sit there and tell you about it. And then he gets upset with the ESPN and threatens them and wants to threaten a lawsuit. It's like, you gonna really threaten the people that are cutting checks? Like, is this really your strategy? This is your strategy right now. How about you not do that? And I think there's enough missteps there where I don't think Texas and OU give a damn at this point. Their eyes are on the prize, and they're going to play out the string here in the Big 12. But I don't think Texas and the OU are losing any kind of sleep over Bowlsby. And hell, if anything, there's probably some sort of vindication as relates to that too. And by the way, another thing that you have to put in there, man, it's especially from a Texas fan standpoint, not really all fans, and I think everyone who follows the Big 12 will say something. You also have someone that really addresses some of the officiating that happens in the Big 12 on Saturdays, because sometimes it's not all the times, but sometimes it just looks bad, man. Like there are enough games where I looked at them and said, this really should be addressed at some point. Let's go throw it out there.
So one of my favorite parts about being at the Final Four was I was walking around the stadium, and I know Greg Sankey was standing, in the concourse, and nobody had any idea who he was. And so it's kind of funny to me. It's like, here's the most powerful man in college athletics. No one has. So he was just standing there in the concourse, like looking at his phone, and nobody was bothering him. And so I eventually bothered him. First, I took a short video because I was like, how funny is this? Here's the most powerful man in college sports, and nobody has any idea who he is. But I went up to him, and I was, just talking to him and introduced myself and said, don't kill us. Talking about the Big 12, because like there's a lot of mistakes I think that Bob Bowlsby made. We've been over those. I think there's also some credit that he should get. But it does look like the Big 12 pushed him out, and that probably was the right decision. But I do reserve the right to say probably, because if they don't make the right hire here, I think we are looking at a situation where the Big 12 could be staring its own mortality in the face, which didn't seem to be the case when all this went down, and then Houston and UCF and Cincinnati and BYU were at it. It looked like that was going to secure the viability. Now, maybe at a minimum, that wasn't what was needed. There needed to be more than just securing viability, and there need to be long-term insurances here. But I mean, if they bring in the wrong guy that makes mistakes in terms of new TV deal, whatever it is, the Big 12 is looking at not existing based on that mistake. And look, I think every conference right now, aside from the SEC and the Big Ten, are looking at how they're going to figure out how to keep up with the Joneses, because they're all falling behind pretty substantially here because of the TV money. And so it's very precarious for everybody, for the Pac-12, for the ACC, and for the Big 12.
Well, that being said, Ari, thank you for joining me, man. It was a great conversation as always. Ari, you see you feel a little bit under the weather, so you might want to go and get a little bit of rest. But make sure, once again, hey, you lasted this long, you definitely had to have liked the video. So, and if you did, no matter what, leave something in the comments section for us. Let us know how you feel. Let us know what you feel about Bob Bowlsby and what you feel like his legacy really is. And we're a little bit too harsh on him. We're a little bit too soft on him. You give us your feedback. Give us your opinions on that. Hey, we're going to have more content that's coming throughout this entire week. Of course, you may be seeing this 2 years from now. Hey, we just know we talked about it 2 years previously. I'm glad you found us. It's like you're from the future. I'm glad you found us. It's been fantastic. Hit the like and subscribe button. Subscribe, share the video with everybody. Texas Longhorn Football Channel. My man Ari Temkin, Anwar Richardson. We're out. Talk to you later. See you.